The coaching carousel continues to turn into the 11th hour of the college football offseason. It's the offseason. There is no offseason anymore. And these coaching changes seems like they just get later and later and later. It was just a couple of days ago that we heard about James Coley going to UGA to coach wide receivers. James Coley just got hired at South Carolina. Hasn't even coached a game yet. Yeah. He was part of the Jimbo Fisher regime that was kicked out of Texas A&M there, Aggie land. And South Carolina scooped him up. And I'd already been watching press conferences South Carolina talking about James Coley and his recruiting chops that he possesses in South Florida. And this is going to be great for the Gamecocks. And this guy comes with tons of experience. Shane Beamer had worked with him at UGA whenever James Coley was at UGA prior to this. And this was all made possible by Brian McClendon leaving UGA. He's now the ex-wide receiver coach from UGA, is going to be the wide receivers coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So James Coley off to South Carolina, off to UGA from South Carolina without ever even coaching a game. And then you've got Josh Crawford coming in to coach running backs at UGA because Dell McGee is going to be the head coach at Georgia State. And the reason Dell McGee is going to be the head coach at Georgia State is because Georgia State's head coach, Sean Elliott, left to be at South Carolina. So we got a full circle here of coaches flip-flopping and causing dominoes to fall here late in February. What do you make of all this stuff? Who are the winners and losers here? I don't feel like, me personally, I don't feel like anybody really lost out in these deals. Obviously South Carolina lost Coley, but they also just got a head coach as their tight ends coach and a guy who has coached in South Carolina before. And, oh, by the way, his family lived there the whole time he coached at Georgia State. So who do you think won in this situation and who lost?
I think, all parties win, right? And also, I kind of think that in some way, like Kirby was like, "Hey, watch this. I'm gonna, Dale, you've been great to us. I'm gonna get you a head coaching job. Watch this. Let me hire James Coley, right? And then, McClendon goes to Tampa Bay, and and so, or maybe it was McClendon who threw the first marble or whatever you want to say, cast the first stone. That was the first domino to fall there." But it is kind of interesting. But when you look at it, at the end of the day, Brian McClendon goes to the NFL. And by the way, Todd Bowles, his son, plays for Georgia, is an inside linebacker for Georgia. And so you'd have to think at some point they cross paths. And, that's kind of how that relationship started. Really, a lot of this just kind of comes from UGA, and of course they're filling two of their positions in the process. But I think that Georgia got an upgrade in James Coley. I think, and I like Brian McClendon a lot, but from a recruiting perspective, which is what Kirby tends to go for with his assistant coaches, I think that James Coley is an upgrade from Brian McClendon in that regard. Look, James Coley was the guy who went out and got Isaiah Wilson, not just receivers now, but he went out and got Isaiah Wilson. He went out and got George Pickens. He got Amarius Mims, Kenny McIntosh. There are a number of players that James Coley had his hand in recruiting for Georgia, not just at the receiver position, but when you look at Georgia's roster over the past few years, really since James Coley left and since George Pickens, they have not recruited the wide receiver position that well. So I think that this is a pretty big position hire for Georgia. Obviously, Dell McGee getting the job at Georgia State, he gets to stay in state, which is actually really important because he has been an in-state employee, a state of Georgia employee for so long that he's almost vested. He's almost got 20 years now at this point. So I think that he really was like looking at his retirement and saying, it's actually going to be pretty sweet to be a vested employee of the state and stay in state and go coach at a school that his son plays at. His son is an incoming freshman, defensive back, I believe, or maybe a wide receiver, one of the skill positions. But so his son's going to be playing there. I mean, it's a big win for Del McGee, right? He gets his first head coaching position. I think he's going to do well there. And then the only loser, I guess you could say, is South Carolina. I think that James Coley was a pretty big get for them for their recruiting efforts. And I think that it's going to be a step down for South Carolina. And unfortunately, somebody's got to lose something here. And I think that that's the big loser at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think Georgia losing Brian McClendon kind of sucks, right? I mean, you don't ever want to lose continuity, lose a coach that you felt good about. I felt pretty good about where the wide receiver room was going at the University of Georgia. I feel like he's done a pretty good job. But yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. South Carolina needs to focus on recruiting, and they lost a really good recruiter in James Coley. I don't think Sean Elliott is quite the ringer that you're wanting to send to these kids' living rooms, right? So I definitely think South Carolina had, they lost a little something there. But as I said, Sean Elliott is a guy that his family still lives in Columbia. They never moved from there. So his kids have been going to school there the whole time. Like, they said that Sean Elliott, his son plays high school football, right? Sean Elliott never missed a game. Even as the head coach of Georgia State. So he would be back and forth to South Carolina just constantly, which I know is not far from Atlanta necessarily. Columbia's not too far, but I mean, it's more than just a little stroll down the road. So I think that they gain some function there in the fact that they've got a guy that really does love the program and is doing it for all the right reasons. He wants to be closer to his family. It's now, I think that Georgia State underperformed a little bit in some cases this past year, but it wasn't a guy that was about to get fired or anything like that. So I think that's a good pickup for South Carolina there, and they actually picked Sean Elliott up before this James Coley situation had taken place. So it was, you had a good thing happen and then you had a bad thing happen. So I think college football in this world, I think you just kind of want to mitigate disasters, right? I think you're just trying to stop the bleeding when something bad happens. Inevitably, you're going to have a decommitment. You're going to have a flip. You're going to have a coach leave. It's going to happen. But if you can jump on damage control quickly, then I think that makes a huge difference. And fighting the bad with the good is something that I think that Kirby Smart has done. For example, Kirby Smart has done really well at UGA. Every time you hear bad news, it's like, bam, good news in your face. And I think that this worked out pretty well for all parties. I think. Thank you for watching the show Between the Numbers Sports Podcast. Thank you so much. We do appreciate it. Y'all think Eric B will be big for UCLA? So this is Eric Bieniemy. He was from the Commanders, right? And he will be the offensive coordinator and associate head coach for the UCLA Bruins. Look, I think UCLA, I think they got to get with the times. And I think this NIL situation at UCLA, I think the part of the reason that Chip Kelly wanted out, and this isn't the sole reason, it's not the only reason, but I think it is one of the reasons. He was kind of getting shunned by some of these boosters and things. There was kind of some cliques forming, from what I understand, in that booster club and sponsors there for that NIL system. So I think that Eric is going to have to get in there and lay some groundwork with these boosters. And if he can get them fired up, then I think that, as your NIL goes these days, so your roster goes. And I think it's going to be a couple of years of building up a roster before we're going to be able to really judge Bieniemy by, how are we going to know? It's probably going to be pretty rough for a couple of years, don't you think?
I would think so. And when you look at this hire, I think UCLA has to feel pretty good about the hire. I think this is the only coaching move that I can think of where an NFL coach has come to college. This is a guy who coached at UCLA. He was there from 03 to 05 at UCLA as a running backs coach, and also someone who won a few championships with the Kansas City Chiefs, where he was the offensive coordinator for 5 seasons. So I think that's a pretty big selling point if you're UCLA and you are pitching your product, your school, to a recruit, especially on the offensive side of the football, especially at the quarterback position, when Eric can go in home to these bigger recruits than what UCLA is used to getting and saying, yeah, I coached Patrick Mahomes. I coached Travis Kelce, I coached Tyreek Hill, that matters to these recruits. On the flip side, you look at what he did with Washington and it wasn't very good. So maybe him having Patrick Mahomes kind of made the offense what it is, and being under Andy Reid, maybe that was a little bit more of what really was happening. And I think that some of the shine on Eric was starting to wear off, and he needed a refresh, an update, and a restart. I think coming down to the college ranks is kind of where he'll find that. And also UCLA is getting, I think, a plus higher for this position for UCLA. And this may be the start of them joining the Big Ten and, kind of figuring things out and putting their money where their mouth is and trying to be relevant in a new conference.
And they're going to be able to put a lot more money where their mouth is because they're going to be getting paid a lot more money. Mm-hmm. This new contract that starts up, including UCLA, is gonna pay them right around $100 million a year once they get into the full swing of that contract. So that is a very, very big get financially for the UCLA Bruins, and I think a big get as a coach who has been with the Kansas City Chiefs, the Commanders, my goodness, Minnesota Vikings. He's coached at UCLA before as a running backs coach. So at twice, 2 different times. So this is a guy that knows the program. I think it's best case scenario for UCLA, considering I imagine it was probably a shock to some that Chip Kelly would leave and take an offensive coordinator position. But I think it's a perfect fit for Chip Kelly, and I think this is a perfect fit for UCLA. And I think Chip Kelly actually probably did UCLA a favor. I think that they did them a favor in the fact that they're not going to have to owe him any money, and it frees UCLA to move on and whenever, which I think they were going to do anyway. So this, I think, worked out very, very well for the Bruins.